Let's get started here. Let's just talk about what a Horary chart is. A Horary chart is a chart for the birth of a question that comes to mind, or an idea, or a proposition. And the way it works is that the theory behind Horary astrology is that all of this takes place in the unconscious mind. And once all of the factors that are related to the question or the proposition or the idea or whatever it is come together in such a way that it comes into the conscious mind and becomes an active question, then that's the time of the chart. That's the time that you use for the chart. And now, in some cases, that time can't be ascertained. So, if somebody comes to you with a question, you're the astrologer, then the time you would use is the time that they came to you and the question became clear in your mind. Horary astrologers have found that works very well because it tends to be almost as good a time as when it first becomes apparent to the querent. Now, the querent, of course, is the person asking the question. Horary astrology doesn't have quite the exactness of natal astrology because it's dealing with mental factors, and the timing can sometimes is a factor. But what it lacks there, it makes up for in lots of different wealth of details. So once you get the time and the place for a question, you erect a chart. The querent, the person asking the question, is represented by the first house. So you look at the ruler of the first house and the moon, and those rule the querent, okay? And the way you interpret a Horary chart, you first have to figure out what all the significators are. So the significator of the querent is the moon and the ruler of the first house. They're co-significators. Then you have to figure out what the significator of the question is. And you determine that by looking at the house. You look at houses generally. So if the question regards the personality, the health, physical body, those kinds of things, then it's a first house question. And the significator is the ruler of the house. If it relates to money and finances, possessions, then it's a second house question. Third house question are neighbors and siblings, or short journeys, or studies, or something like that. Fourth house, which is probably the one that's most used, relates to, of course, real estate, the home, the end of things, and lost objects. Many people use Horary astrology to find lost objects. You've got the idea that the significator of the question is determined by the house that relates to it. For some questions, like public interest questions, there's no querent in a public interest question. Okay, you just have to interpret the houses according to using the ones that are appropriate for the question. So that's an example, Renee, of where you don't have a querent. You pick the house that rules the question, and the ruler of that house, which may be the planet that rules the sign on the cusp of the house, that's the significator of the question.
So the Malaysian side is the 11th house Uranus question?
I don't know. I hadn't thought about it that way, but as Christopher said, you could think about it as it's a lost object, and so you look to the fourth house. You look to the significator. You pick the significator by picking the ruler of the fourth house. Political contest charts are interesting because they're sometimes a little trickier. If it's is the home team going to win, the home team is always is on the east side of the chart, and the visiting team is on the west side of the chart. And this is true for if you're asking about your something, is my something going to win, then the east side, the first house represent you, the querent, also represent that side, and the other side of the question is represented by the seventh house or the west side of the chart. And generally in contest charts, you look to see which side has the most power and harmony. Which side of the chart? You just put a line right down the middle. That's the simplest way to do it. And then you can get into more detail, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
So say you're a Democrat.
Yeah.
Are the Democrats going to keep the Senate?
And the best way to judge it may be to pick the Democrats as the east side of the chart because they're the home team.
Because they rule the
Because
House
they
now.
currently
they have the Senate
have the
now.
majority, and the Republicans are on the out and want to get to be the in party. So I would judge it by looking at it as a contest chart with the Democrats on the left side, Republicans on the right side. Okay, now.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm wondering, traditionally, hasn't the Democrats been one planet and the Republicans another planet, Jupiter and Saturn?
Right. Typically, the Democrats have been ruled by Saturn and the Republicans by Jupiter. The Democrats have typically been more for the common folk and the poor folk. You know, if you go back and you go back to FDR, and, you know, that whole thing. They've represented the little guy, which is Saturn. Meager the person with meager resources. Whereas the Republicans like the guys that tend to be more business oriented. Maybe not so much just the affluent, but they believe that when business is good, that flows down to everybody. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that. Jupiter's the planet of religion, too. For contest charts, it's not when you ask the question.
Okay.
It's when the contest begins. Which for elections is a little tricky.
Yeah.
Because the election starts first on the East Coast
Right.
and then propagates west. So, if it's a football game, then it's pretty easy because you know when the start time is. Now, the types of questions that can come to mind or that people will come to you as an astrologer are things like that. There's a business proposition and they want to know if they should get involved with it. Okay, that's the proposition thing. They might have had an idea. I've got this great idea and I want to go make it happen, and is it worth pursuing? Should I marry the person that I have in mind? Okay. And so when you look at that chart, there's not only considerations about is it advisable to pursue the question, but will it happen? Will the thing come together, and how long will it take? But basically, for timing, you look at days, weeks, and months, or weeks, months, and years, depending upon the type of question it is. And if the significators are in fixed signs, then you use the longest period. Movable is the fastest, and mutables in between. So in other words, if it's a question that reasonably might happen in a matter of weeks or months, days, weeks, or months, then if it's in fixed signs, it's going to be months. And you can determine the number of months by how far the significators are apart. Okay? How long? In other words, if they're 4 degrees apart, then it's going to take 4 months if they're in fixed signs. Once you determine the significators.
Okay, 4 degrees apart. So you'd have a conjunction of the significators.
Well, let's look at a chart here. This is the Malaysia chart. So let's look at this first as if it were that the Aquarian was asking the question that they have a loved one on the plane and they want to find out about it. So then you can see that the ruler of the first house is going to be Venus. And of course the moon being right on the ascendant, the moon is going to be the co-ruler of the querent. you'd look at both Venus and the moon. Now, what's the significator of the question? Well, first of all, if it's a lost object, it would be in the fourth house. But then you're looking for where. If this were a lost object, we would look to the fourth house, the ruler of the fourth house, in this case, which would be Jupiter. Okay?
Something big.
Right, and we'd go look in Leo. We'd look at the fact that it's in Leo, and we would go look in that environment. That's typically what you do. So, for example, because the significator is in Leo, I'm going to look up Leo here. In Horary Astrology, the chapter on the first 6 houses, it says that Leo is the part of the country that is hot, dry climate, rather low level stretches, desert conditions. Land left wild. Sports, places of sports and amusement, such as golf courses. Part of the city would be theaters, schools, children, parks, playgrounds, and places of amusement. And in the home, Leo would be the areas ruled by Leo are the nursery, the fireplace, the stove, the hearth, and places where fire is used. And you can come up with a whole bunch more. But we're not going to do this as a lost object. Because what we want to know, the question that was actually asked was, what happened to the Malaysia flight? What house would that rule?
Death? Eighth?
9th house of long distance travel.
I like the 12th house.
Uranus rules airplanes.
Yes.
So I don't know what house rules airplanes, but to me, it's a flight. So it's the airplane and it's Uranus. And Uranus is the 11th house?
Well, you could do it
What
that.
house is
The question has to do with an event, not the object, the event. And so that's why we don't usually look at Uranus. But I think you could do that, or Mars. You can do that. Zane presents some great set of rules for interpreting Horary charts. But there is, it's not quite like natal astrology in that there is some intuition involved, a lot more intuition involved in it than there is when interpreting a natal chart. If you assume that you're supposed to just follow the rules in natal astrology and you're not doing fortune telling. But in Horary astrology, there's that issue there. So, I would say that if you don't like these rules, you can always make up your own rules. What?
Absolutely, Mars is an accident, but Uranus is so sudden and unexpected and shocking.
Yes. Anybody else out there, what house do you think, let's pick the house that rules this event. Let's see, what have we had? 9th for long journeys, we've had 12th, 8th for death. I would think that it's such a mysterious event. I'd have to go with the 12th. But you'd look at all of these, you'd look at all the factors, but let's see what happens when we do that.
And just in response to what Renee said, Zane actually says that Neptune rules aviation in Horary astrology.
Yes.
Thank you, Christopher.
Yes, it is ruled by Neptune. I'd forgotten that. Neptune rules flights of fancy, and Neptune was discovered in 1848, and it wasn't too many years after that
First balloon flights.
yeah, probably the first balloon flights.
The Neptune is really remarkable in this chart because it's intercepted. And it's really...
Yes, it's intercepted. Okay, but let's go back to the house. Let's go back and we're going to apply the rules of Horary astrology as C.C. Zane presents them. What are the significators, of the question here? We already said Venus, by virtue of ruling the first house, is co-significator of the querent. And then the co-significator of the question, if it's the 12th house, is Uranus. Now, normally you pick the one that's closest to the house cusp. as the ruler in it. Of course, the moon obviously is a co-significator of the question, and so is Mars by virtue of ruling Aries on the cusp. Okay, so the next thing you do is you look to see are there any aspects between Uranus and Venus or Uranus and the moon. Now we're doing this as a loved one asking the question. Okay. You're first going to look to the two significators, which are Venus and Uranus. Are they making an aspect? Yeah, they're making an aspect. What aspect is it?
An opposition.
It's an opposition. Is it applying or is it separating?
Applying.
Yeah. Now, when you're determining, like, if an event is going to happen, is it advisable and will it happen? Like a proposition or a marriage or something like that. It's only going to happen if the significators are within aspect, applying to an aspect, and the aspect is harmonious. Now, mutual reception plays a big part in Horary astrology, in that if the significators are in mutual reception, that's a strong indication that the event will transpire, even if they have a bad aspect, and if they're also aspecting each other, then that aspect will play out also. And if it's an evil aspect, then there'll be some discordant event involved with it. But so here you have the opposition, the separation aspect. So you can assure the loved one that they're never going to see, they're permanently separated from their loved one. This would have been interesting, I suppose, doing this if you didn't know what had happened. We're pretty sure that we know where the Flight 370 is, right?
It's not in
At
the
the
desert.
bottom of the ocean.
And it's not in the desert, bottom of the ocean, right? Well, let's see if we can determine from this what might have happened. So one thing you do is you go look at the significator and you step it through as it moves along. In Horary astrology, you take the significator and you see the aspects that it makes as it moves. Like Venus, for example, at 12 degrees is going to first make an opposition with Uranus, then it's going to make a conjunction with the Sun. It's separating from Pluto, square Pluto, and sextile Jupiter, and in conjunct the ascendant, and the sextile Mars. So you can look at the significator and sort of step it along. It's also interesting to look at the moon and see it move, see what it does. Well, it's going to go conjunct the ascendant. It's going to go first, it's going to go trine Pluto. And then it's going to go conjunct the ascendant. So looking at Venus again, so Venus, first thing it does is go opposition Uranus, which means, separation of loved ones, end of question there. And then it goes conjunct the Sun, where the Sun represents authority, so something to do with the authorities who are going to be all over this kind of incident. I don't know what. Probably not.
Could it be the pilot? If you look at the Sun conjunct Venus, would you look at the pilot as the authority?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, you would. You might think of the Sun as the pilot. There's that grand trine between Mars, Jupiter, and Uranus. But the Mars aspecting Uranus and ruler of the 12th house means, there could be some, crime involved. It's possible that it was an accident.
Like something caught fire.
Something caught fire, and then, they all passed out, and that was it. So that's a possibility. That would, if I had to guess, that I would think it would be something like that, fire, electrical malfunction. Now, there's some things I left out here that I just want to mention. If a significator moves out of a sign before it makes an aspect, that's called being void of course. Like the moon is void, of course, when it's going to move out of the sign. It's not going to make any other aspects. Nothing's going to happen. So in that case, you can't interpret the chart. And the other time when you can't interpret a chart is if it's considered not radical. A chart's not radical if it has less than 3 degrees or more than 27 degrees on the ascendant. So if it was like 2 degrees and 3 minutes of Taurus instead of 15 degrees, it would not be considered radical. Or if it was more than 27 degrees. And what that means is that all the factors involved in the question haven't come together sufficiently, that it hasn't matured enough that you can deal with it as a Horary chart, or that the question is fully understood. It's still evolving. It's not yet. It hadn't been born yet. So that's something to consider. We said what happened, which is kind of a funny question. What happened would be a very difficult, for me personally, a very difficult question to answer from this. But you just have to you'd have to pick out a house and ruler and Uranus and look at the fact that, Mars is co-ruler and actually separating from an aspect to it. Venus is opposition. You just have to make some wild guess. You'd have to be pretty intuitive, more intuitive than I am to do that. I mean, the question was asked is, well, what happened? So there's a mystery here, and that's why I thought the 12th house. What happened to it? Well, it's a mystery. Okay. Well, can we unravel the mystery with the Horary chart? I can't, but somebody who's psychic might be able to. They might be able to see these factors in there and figure it out. I would say it's a sudden event, and since Mars is involved, it's an accident of some kind.
It seems like there's a communication just stopped. There's Mercury in 0 degrees in retrograde. The ruler of the 6th house is in the 6th house. And the 6th house is distressed. I don't know if anyone can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
When
Loud
you
and clear.
say 6th house is distress, is that a general statement, or it's distressed here because of oppositions? What?
I must have got that from Ivy's book, that the 6th house, with sickness, it also includes distress.
Uh-huh.
And it's pretty loaded, that 6th house in this chart.
Yeah, what else does the 6th house rule? What part of the airplane?
The galley.
The galley. Food.
And where there's food, there's fire and microwave.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking the microwave caught fire and went down. I mean, it could be that simple.
Yeah, Pluto's involved in a T-square, squaring. Pluto's squaring the Sun, Venus, and Uranus.
Let's quickly move on. We're going to look at 2 more charts. So let me just, before we move this, before we flip charts, in this case, the significators we decided are Venus and Uranus, and they are in aspect and applying to an aspect. So generally, in a question, when you ask a question about the advisability, will something happen, then that's a good indication that because it's an opposition, the 2 significators applying to an aspect of each other means it'll happen. If it's not, if they're heavily discordant, like a square or an opposition, then that would mean that things will fly apart and the event will not happen. Okay, now that doesn't apply to this question, just for general things. Let me bring up another chart here.
What?
Oh, that's because they were asked at the same time.
Was it?
Yeah,
at the
which
end
is
of
fine.
Class, or?
Yeah, this is at the end of class, which is fine. I mean, we're just going
2 different topics.
we're going to apply different topics to it and see what here. So here, this is the U.S. centric question. What political party will win Senate majority? And here, like I said, I would pick the party, I would pick divide it like a contest chart. The left side would be the Democrats because they're currently in the majority. The right side would be the Republicans. And I'd look to see which side has the most power and harmony. Well, which is that?
The West.
Yeah. It's got all the power. Of course, it's got Saturn in the 7th, which you might say is, which also rules the 10th house. But they've got Jupiter. See, they've got Jupiter in their 10th house here. Whereas the Democrats have Saturn ruling their 10th house. You see why Jupiter is in the 10th? See, this becomes their first house. The first house of Republicans, because they're on the right side. You go around here, and here's their 10th house, Jupiter. So they really have, it's theirs to lose, that's for sure. So the answer is Republicans will take majority in.
I object.
I do too.
Oh, you know what? I'll bet you'll find out it's not all that bad.
And in a few years, it'll turn back the other way.
Yeah, and in a few years it'll turn back the other way. Political stuff, there's two sides to every question. You could go add up the power and the harmony on both sides of this and say, what do you know? There's actually more power and harmony on the left side of the chart. It's possible. But if you're just looking at the chart like you normally would read a Horary chart, you'd say, no, it's not going to happen. You just add up 1 through 6,
Right.
7 through 12.
And that would be enough.
Yeah. What?
If you use it as a contest chart, don't you need the date of the contest?
Yeah, that would
Well, yeah, you do. Absolutely. Okay, we're going to go 11:04. Yeah, let's make it 7 a.m. All this.
Capitol building.
We'll do the Capitol building. Capitol building. Okay, that's good enough.
Whoa.
Well, that is quite a bit different. Okay,
Well, Jupiter's on the midheaven.
Jupiter's on the middle. It's on the right side of the chart, though. If you look at the astrodyne.
Venus is on the ascendant.
Venus is on the ascendant.
What would that say to you, Christopher?
Somebody's got to love the
Result.
Let's see. If we look at the 10th house, it's a little discordant, which is for the Democrats. And in the 4th house, it's a little discordant. Now it's kind of more. It's a little more even, except if you look at the power here, I'd almost guess that there's more power on the left side of the chart now. It's a different chart. Except it's got a lot more discord too. More power, more discord. So I'd have to say the power is definitely on the side. In this chart, it's on the left side. And there's quite a bit of harmony in that 12th house. And that stuff is right on the ascendant. That means the Democrats are going to stuff the ballot box. Okay, let's move on. Then here's the third chart. We'll just look at this real quick. Here's a chart where the person asked if the investment that her husband made, if he's going to lose his investment. Because he's just been notified that he's probably going to lose his investment. But there's always a chance of getting the money back later on in a lawsuit. So she comes to the astrologer and she says, are we going to lose all our money? Or the money, lose our investment in this thing? So
It's an investment, second house or eighth house.
If it's other people's money.
it's the husband's money. You know, it's tricky. You know,
No,
because
to the wife, it's other people's money too.
to the wife, yeah, it's not really because you know
It's their money.
It's their money too. But you know, legally things can be in one person's name or another. And sometimes, in this case, the investment there wasn't any way to have it in both names, so it was in the husband's name. So the question is, well, will the husband lose his investment? So the significator is what? The significator of the querent Mercury and the moon is the co-significator. Okay? Ruler, let's say it's an 8th house question, because it's the husband's money or the spouse's money is ruled by the 8th house. Okay, that's for sure. Then that makes a significator Mars, which generally indicates loss. Okay? But now let's look at the two significators, Mars and Mercury. What are they doing? They're trying. They're in aspect. Are they applying or separating?
Applying.
They're applying. Okay?
Mars is separating from, well, it's applying to a trine to the midheaven.
So it's retrograde?
Yeah, because it's retrograde. Mercury's applying to a trine to Mars, and Mars is applying to a trine to the midheaven.
In this case, the simple answer might be, well, is there any mutual reception here? Let's see. So, let's see. Mars and Saturn are in mutual reception. Mars is in the exaltation sign of Saturn.
Oh, gotcha.
And Saturn is in the home sign of Mars.
I
So
see.
that puts them in mutual reception. And then Saturn and Pluto are in mutual reception. So that's
So exaltation counts for mutual, it's not just the home sign.
home or exaltation.
Oh,
Yeah, 5th house was speculation. Yeah, so my guess would be that, and then with Saturn the second, that, yeah. Now in this
Saturn's
case,
retrograde.
there's litigation involved too in this thing.
Do
So
we know that, or you're reading it from the chart?
I know that. That
Okay.
when the question was asked, there was the imminent loss of money. Okay, it was good. They were going down. That was it. That was going to go. They were bankrupted by another company, and then they filed. The plan was to file suit against that company to try and recover the investment. Okay, so the question was, we're going to lose our money now, but will we get it back later? You're going to lose it first, and then you're going to
Malefic's in the second house.
then you're going to win the lawsuit and get your money back. And how long is it going to take? Well, as Mercury, I would say, because litigation is involved, and that we're dealing with a fixed sign here that Mercury's in, it's got to go. It's got to go almost 2 degrees. So you would tell them it's going to take 2 years. So you can say, well, you can sit tight for 2 years. In 2 years, you'll collect it. Get your money back. Now, there's some real tricks here that we haven't looked at. Like in the charts we've looked at, there was an aspect between the significators. In this case, Mercury and Mars. But if they're not, there's 2 other ways that an event can be brought about, and that is through translation of light or collection of light. If the 2 significators are separated. What happens in translation of light is if a planet comes and if the significators are separating, and a planet comes along and makes an aspect to one and then an aspect to another, then you would say that, well, that's not going to happen because they're separating from the aspect. Okay, there's translation of light and collection of light. Collection of light is when the 2 significators don't make an aspect to each other. Okay? So you might say, well, nothing's going to happen, sorry. But if they both make aspect to another planet, that's called collection of light. And that can bring an event about. And the other way you can bring an event about is through translation of light, where they're separating. But another planet comes along and makes an aspect to one and then the other. That's called translation of light. And that can bring an event about. Usually, it's only the faster-moving planets that can make that happen, like Mercury and Venus, obviously. It might be the Sun. Or the Moon. The Moon can do it. The reason we're going to swap Mercury and Mars in this chart was so that, forgetting the retrograde, that Mercury would be
the faster moving planet moving
and would
away
be moving
from-
away.
Yeah.
So that means it's separating. Well, is there another anything that's going to come and save the day? Okay. Well, if the moon were in aspect, say the moon were at 22 degrees or something, up there in Leo, Then it would come along and it would go sextile Mercury, which is now where Mars is, right? And then it'd go opposition Mars, which is now where Mercury is. And discounting the opposition, you'd say, by translation of light, it's going to happen. And the moon is what's going to make it happen. The moon in Leo. And the moon's in the 11th house. So that means, you could then interpret that for whatever the 11th house is about. A friend is going to come along and make something happen.
Or it could be a
Or
class
help you.
action lawsuit.
Or it could be a class action lawsuit. Right. Or, anything that the moon might represent, or the moon in the sign, the moon in the house, you might say, well, this thing's going to come along and
But
make
we're
it happen.
still also looking at the moon as representing Aquarius, right?
Yeah, we're still looking at the moon as representing the Aquarian. Because if you don't see an aspect between, like if we hadn't seen this Mercury aspect, then we'd go look at the moon. So the moon's going to come along, and it's moving a lot faster. So if you wanted to see the sequence of events, you'd look at what happens first. The moon moves 13 degrees in one day. The moon's applying to that opposition.
13 degrees apart, which is the extent of a luminary in the sensitive house.
Right, but the point is that it's going to be the first one that makes that aspect to Mercury. It first goes opposition Mercury, and then Mercury goes trine Mars. And you look at those events. So that means first something bad's going to happen, and then something good's going to happen.
The moon carries something bad with it?
No, because
The
it goes
opposition does.
it goes
Oh,
opposition
yeah.
Aquarian. You could probably say that the midheaven is if the significators are not an aspect, but they're making aspect to another planet, including the ascendant of the midheaven, then those things might bring it together. So if it's the midheaven, then it might be the goodwill of the querent might be enough to make the thing happen. Or if it's the ascendant, you might say the personal prowess of the querent is going to be able to overcome other factors.
How did you happen to get to the goodwill of the querent?
Because it's the MC, the 10th house, honor, credit, reputation, that kind of thing.
Okay. Could it be the ambition of the querent?
Could be, sure, absolutely. Okay, we've come to the end of our meeting. You want to talk about what you're going to do next time?
Let's look at Patsy's client's chart thoroughly. It may take us 2 sessions in order to do that.
That site click.
It is Astro, ASTRO, Data, DATA, Bank, BANK.com.